just bedlam in there. It's just, you know, it's just junk and concrete and everything everywhere. You know, there was people everywhere, and just had to do what we could. You know, we find each person as we came to them. You know, there was people behind other people as well, so it was just a mess.
Any person not connected to the rescue effort, please leave the sitting area immediately, and aftershock is expected.
Warnings by earthquake experts that a severe aftershock could follow the quake hampered rescue operations for a short time.
Okay, well, I think at this stage we've got to keep away from the buildings. We've got to try and keep everybody out.
I believe there's a fear there's going to be a second tremor.
Yes, there is a possible. That is possible. We're taking precautions for that. I think what we've got to do now is to make sure people realise that they won't have time to run. This thing will hit, and you won't have time to. You'll only have time to blink your eye. So they've got to move.
What stage have rescue operations reached
now?
now?
The situation is that we've got a lot of people out. I've got a list here of all the people that we've got out so far. I'm just counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I got 13 people who've been taken out so far and are in a satisfactory condition. As far as I know, there is one possible dead, but not confirmed at this stage. And there is a lot of other people trapped. We don't know how many.
One of the most incredible entrap situations I've worked in, and to see those people the way they were there, hopelessly trapped under bricks, rubble and poker machines.
There was one elderly gentleman that we were working on that when we first got there, he was fully conscious. We just simply couldn't get his legs out, and unfortunately he bled to death while we were there. And there's another one very similar that we've just pulled out that's suffered a cardiac arrest. I don't know his status at the moment. He had, the elderly gentleman had such massive leg injuries that I doubt whether he would have survived. He just bled to death.
As rescue operations swung to roof level, emergency crews, construction workers, office staff and passers-by formed a human chain to clear a way, brick by brick, to those still trapped.
Big one. Spread it out a bit if you like. Just straight one. Righto.
The Workers' Club was the scene of the greatest loss of life in the Newcastle Quake, but damage was widespread throughout the city. At a time when demand for medical attention was at its highest, the hospitals did not escape structural damage. At Royal Newcastle Hospital, hundreds of patients were evacuated with fears that older buildings could tumble. Patients were treated under tents, pitched beside the beach. Newcastle's other major public hospital, the Mater Misericordia, suffered huge cracks to its brick walls. Patients were moved out. Those in intensive care were kept alive with emergency power generators. From the Mater Hospital, the huge Newcastle steelworks could be seen. Plumes of smoke poured into the air as the plant began an emergency shutdown procedure. Gases from the coke ovens were burnt off as the power blacked out. Early fears that there'd been an explosion at the plant were unfounded. The Technical College at Tyers Hill was hit by the full force of the quake. Chemicals in the laboratory wing ignited, causing a serious fire. Built on alluvial soil, the shockwave passed through the campus, crumbling buildings in its wake. Remarkably, although some 500,000 people were jolted by the quake, just 12 were to lose their lives, while some 100 were injured. The timing undoubtedly saved many. Schools were also closed for the summer vacation. There's no telling How many would have been injured or killed had these classrooms been full of children? Within hours of the quake, Prime Minister Hawke was inspecting the Workers' Club site, breaking his summer vacation and promising federal government assistance. State Premier Nick Greiner flew back from Hawaii. With more than 100 public buildings damaged in some way, his job was going to be a tough and expensive one in the months to follow. Late in the day, there was a subtle but important change in the approach taken by rescue workers. Cave experts, using heat-sensing devices, crawled amongst the wreckage in the hope that someone may still be found alive. Hopes quickly faded, and the rescue turned to demolition, an operation which went on around the clock. Stories of great courage and bravery always emerge after tragedy. Norm Duffy's quiet heroism was typical. He lay trapped in the Workers' Club for 5 hours before he was released. Despite massive injuries, he held the hands of 2 women lying nearby, offering comfort and support. Rescue workers have praised Norm for the way he held on as they worked to free him. Norm's wife of 38 years, Miriam, was killed by falling rubble.
Norm, you've gone through so much, yet you're still smiling. How do you manage to...
That's false. False. I'm trying to avoid that, the other thing, like, you know, till I get out. Get away from it.
Patrick Murray was a roadie, setting up for the rock concert scheduled for that evening. Had the quake struck during that concert, some 2,500 young people would have been in this auditorium, a situation almost too horrific to consider. Patrick rushed to a backstage room as the auditorium began to shake. Remembering the survivors of the San Francisco quake boosted his morale.
Thought about, you know, those people in San Francisco, how they survived in those cars all that time, so I decided just to relax, stay calm, and try and conserve as much energy as I could.
Mary Ironman was a regular of the club, enjoying a weekly game of hoy. Arriving early, she was playing the pokies. Minutes later, she was lying dazed and trapped.
The trouble is you don't know whether you're going to be saved or not until you see the light where they are coming in. Because everything was piled up on top of you, everything was black. You know, having your life compared to the others that are gone, biggest jackpot in the world.
Runa McElwain was playing the poker machine next to Mary. 4 days later, she was sharing the hospital bed next to Mary.
I was just going to put some more 5 cents in after winning the jackpot. I was going to put some more into the machine. And it danced in front of me and all these bricks came from everywhere. And they all went under me and I fell back onto them. That's how I've fractured my spine.
Great relief also for Jacqueline Rowe, who was injured when the Kent Hotel awning in Beaumont Street collapsed on her and her 2 babies. She managed to push 10-month-old Alana to safety, but cries for help from 23-month-old PJ still haunt her.
I just kept screaming out for PJ, and all I could hear was mum, mum. And I just kept screaming for someone to help me get him out. And then 5 young guys come along and they said, what's the matter? I said, look, my son's under all that. All I could see when he was there was this little boy laying on the ground with all this stuff over him. I thought he was dead. I'm still trying to forget it, but I can't do that. Especially when you've got a 23-month-old baby that nearly died from it.
While his mother may never forget those terrible moments, miraculously PJ escaped his ordeal virtually unscathed. This earthquake is different to others which hit Australia. The damage was recorded over an unusually wide area. 24 kilometres due west of the city centre, the township of Holmesville was rocked. No one was killed, but the stories of damage to buildings and broken dreams are typical of those experienced across the affected districts.
Just a lifetime of you see
your kids, when they were born, flash in front of your face, and the growing up stages. And when it's gone, how do you remember it?
Do you have any insurance?
We have no insurance at all, nothing. And my husband's and my age to try and restart and build from here, I don't know where we'll go. I've got no idea. We've got our ground and that's it. And I've got my kids and my family. That's the main thing.
Earthquakes in Australia are a little like lightning. It's hard to predict where and when they will strike. One man studying exactly what happened is the head of the geology department at Newcastle University, Professor Ian Plimer.
What had happened was that the rocks in continental Australia have been taking up a lot of strain for a long period of time, and eventually the rocks will break, and that breakage was quite coincidentally under a highly populated area.
Why so much damage in Newcastle?
There are a number of reasons for that. The first reason was that it was a very, very shallow earthquake, really quite unusual. And the second thing was that a lot of the damage was due to the fact that the buildings in the Hamilton area were built on the old bed of the Hunter River. And when a shockwave goes through these unconsolidated sands, it accelerates, and so the buildings will suffer much more damage. In fact, the buildings close to the epicentre that didn't suffer much damage were built on rock, or built on areas under which there'd been mining, and the mining had taken all the stresses out of the rock, and these areas just didn't undergo enormous damage.
There are no seismograph stations in Newcastle. This was the last place one would expect an earthquake to strike. And yet history shows Newcastle has been hit by earthquakes many times before. In 1886 and 1925, quakes about 5 on the Richter scale were felt, but little damage was reported. Beth Chamberlain was just 9 years old, but remembers the quake of 1925.
The walls were moving, and I heard the rumbling underneath, and then my mother and my aunt raced in to see if I was all right. And it was a very scary experience, and I think that's what's made it stay in my mind for so long, because I've mentioned it many times over the years to different ones.
What did you think it was in the first occasion?
I didn't know, I suppose because I was too young. Really, it was just something you didn't know.
What about the amount of damage from that first quake? Was there much?
No, there wasn't any. It would be like a very severe tremor, I'd say, but nothing like this one.
The 1989 quake was the biggest this century on the east coast of Australia.
It's at least magnitude 5.5 on the Richter scale. And I would say that it was larger than the 1961 Robertson earthquake and the 1973 Picton earthquake.
Dr. David Denham heads the Bureau of Mineral Resources in Canberra.
The history of earthquake occurrence in southeast Australia is pretty irregular over the last 200 years. The first fleet was only ashore in Sydney by a month or so before they felt an earthquake. And in fact, several small earthquakes have been felt from time to time since that occasion.
The Newcastle Quake was recorded at the Bureau Centre in Canberra. The parallel lines interrupted the telltale peaks. The centre records an earthquake like this one about once a year, somewhere on the east coast of Australia. About 500 strike each year around the world. But all the technical equipment available to scientists cannot predict when or where these quakes will next be felt.
Highly unlikely that Newcastle would have another earthquake. We have had sporadic earthquakes all through Australia. We have had something like 500 of these type of earthquakes every year in the world. The chances of Newcastle having another one are very slim for a number of reasons, that the area has already undergone a strain release, and the second thing is that these earthquakes just occur in a spotty pattern all over Australia. We've had similar major earthquakes in some of the underpopulated areas of Australia. It was just an unfortunate coincidence that it was in a populated area and very shallow.
An aftershock was recorded 10 minutes after the big one, although most people were too distracted to feel it. A second tremor was felt on the following evening. These shocks helped seismologists track down the epicentre, 13 kilometres under Cardiff, southwest of the city centre. The quake was some 10 kilometres beneath the deepest mine, so there were worries for the hundreds of miners working underground in the Hunter Valley's rich coal-producing districts. Instead of scenes of great devastation, scientists claim the coal mines actually helped Newcastle survive.
The fact that Newcastle has mines underneath it, in fact, made the damage a lot less, because the mining has reduced a lot of the stress out of the rocks, and that loss of stress meant that these rocks could actually take on the earthquake energy. The second thing is that the mines are very, very well designed mechanically, and under normal conditions we don't get many rock falls, so it really made no effect at all to the underground mines. The underground mines have actually helped the city of Newcastle.
There was one instance, however, where the presence of coal mines created a subsidence problem of huge proportions. In the suburb of Bar Beach, a living room was literally sucked away. Indirectly, the quake was to blame.
Well, basically, you have an air shaft from an old mine working. That was, when it was completed, the mining there, it was capped with concrete. When the building was built over that, there was a concrete slab put over that. From what we understand, what's happened, water from the water table as a result of the earthquake has been pushed up. It's lifted that concrete plug and then it's sucked back down. And you can see from the damage around, and particularly out the front, that everything around the house and particularly in here has then been sucked in to the hole.
In the days that followed, thousands of tons of concrete were poured into the hole to try and cap the gaping chasm. But structural damage is now something thousands of building and homeowners are coming to terms with. Just why so many awnings in Newcastle collapsed can be explained in terms of structural engineering. It appears a council building code in 1928 ordered all support posts be removed, with concerns over increased car traffic on our roads. Tie support rods took their place.
The awnings were held back by tie rods. The tie rod was only fixed into the brickwork with a 4 to 6 inch diameter bolt only in the brickwork. Above that particular fixing point, typically it seemed that there was a parapet which was unstable due to lead flashing in it. And so when the shake came through, the brickwork above the flashing fell over onto the awning. The load of the brickwork on the awning pulled the bolt out of the tie rod, and hence the awning was then unstable and collapsed down into the street.
The aftershocks left a psychological impact on an expectant community much greater than any subsequent damage to buildings. Experts are divided on whether a quake can strike here again. Some believe that the occurrence of quakes clusters over time. Others believe another quake soon is unlikely.
The Earth is a bit like a tortoise shell with all the platelets moving, and they're either pulling apart in the mid-ocean ridge areas where we get earthquakes and volcanoes, or pushing together as we get, say, in Japan or New Zealand or Chile, and sometimes sliding past each other as we have in San Francisco. Australia sits in the middle of one of these plates, whereas in the western US we're getting a sliding motion. Now in the middle of the plates it's a very, very unusual phenomenon to get an earthquake. They are unpredictable and we don't know when they're going to happen and where they are, but they are really fairly minor. About 5% of the world's earthquakes occur within the plates. So it really is a very, very unusual geological feature.